See, I wonder if it's got anything to do with the state of affairs in the world. Like, for example, if you're, handling a kindergarten class where everything is chaotic, you need a very stern voice. When you're handling, very sophisticated audience, you need to have a servant leadership. So it all depends on which end of the spectrum. Is it that most of us are feeling that, my God, the world is going out of control now, and look to somebody to solve it? I mean, are we in that stage where, whether we like it or not, when a majority elects somebody and there is a certain behavior, is it showing what is happening in the world? And I mean, we can say we have nothing to do about it, but I think it'll be interesting to see. Is it like, I mean, for example, in America, so many people losing their jobs to something outside, and so many people feeling that these foreigners are richer than us, and so many people feeling like, hey, I have no recourse.
Yeah, why are we voting for elites that are shipping our jobs off to Shanghai and Bangalore?
Exactly.
That's the question people have.
Exactly.
And that's why they voted for Trump.
Right. So I'm just saying, is it a reflection of where the world is? And so what can we do a little bit to change that, this hyperventilation of, oh my God, like the world is falling apart feeling? What can we do to bring a sense of, in fact, if you think about, Stone Ages to now, we are actually doing damn good, So what do we need to do to bring a sense of calmness? Because right now everybody is riled up, worried, and maybe that's the reason a certain rulership is looked upon.
Well, I absolutely agree with you, Shashi, that we should not be in denial that we are seeing greater tendencies towards concentration of power, autocracies, oligarchies, if you like, or plutocracies. I mean, look at the inauguration of Trump. You had the plutocracy on demonstration in the front lines there, the richest people in the world. And it's not just the digital, it's also the other ones. And what I see is that even though the MAGA idea is America first, in the end, it's in the America's interest. And I have lived in America, so have you. And you, of course,
grew up in America.
Yes, I grew up in many, both in California, but also on the East Coast. And it is in the interest of the United States if they are going to deal with global problems, climate, pandemic, whatever else, whatever may come. But of course, what we are seeing, I believe, is a concentration of power outside of the institutions of democracy, which is so big, it actually captures democracy. So when you have lobbying, when you have corruption, when you have the billionaires having more money than most of our countries, maybe not India, but they have their personal wealth is more than the GDP of most countries in the world.
Absolutely.
They yield more power than us politicians. We are asked to decide for the world. They actually have the power to decide or even corrupt decisions and capture decisions. When that happens, there is injustice. So you see, United States, one of the richest, or maybe the richest country in the world, with the highest level of inequality, with huge problems of unemployment, going into the Midwest, cities that look like ghost towns. And this is, of course, because capital, we had the social contract in the past, where employers, employees, and the government sat down and said, yes, capitalist country, capitalist market, you will make your profit, but you have a responsibility to society for education, for health, for working conditions, for the environment today. Now, when capital flees in a globalized capitalist economy, it has no responsibility to its country. When I was asked to tax by the IMF, to tax my citizens to deal with the debt, I said to them, yes, I will, but can you tax the rich? They said, yes, of course. I said, yes, but they move. They go to tax havens, they go out. So I will have to tax the middle class and the wage earner. And that would be very, very, and that's what happened, of course, and that was very unjust. When you have that injustice, that creates anger towards the system. And this is where you have these demagogues creating a sense of I can be decisive. But decisive for whom? Decisive for the people or decisive for this oligarchy? And that is what I think Trump is. He is decisive, but he's decisive for the oligarchy. He will face a wall. Now, when these people, these autocratic leaders, when they face a wall, what do? When they face a country, they find a scapegoat. And the scapegoat will be the Chinese, the Indians, migrants. It will be some other problem, or it will be, the internal enemy or LGBTQ. And I have seen this in Europe with Hungary, for example, and Orban. He has become the oligarch leader of his country, but his facade is, we don't want migrants. They don't even have migrants in Hungary. We don't want this, these bad European laws about human rights and so on. That is his facade. Behind that, it is the consolidation of power. So we have to fight that.
So actually,
this is what we have to fight.
To continue that, I mean, Shashi, maybe you can address how one of the biggest things is this, the disproportionate power. It used to be 80-20, now it's like 5-95, I think, 5% controlling 95%. I'm sorry, what is that sound? There's like, oh, outside, okay. Sorry. So
an army marching, it sounds like. Yeah?
So what can we do, maybe in India, what can we do to create a more equitable society? Because I think most of the problems, I think he's right, come from inequality and huge. And in India, at least in the last 20 years, because of IT, you see it, there's more middle class than ever before. Is there stuff in India we can do by watching all this to create less inequality?
Well, as you know, the Indian answer is redistribution. I mean, both George and I come from a kind of social democratic orientation. And the truth is that this business of saying, yes, you can conduct your business, grow and prosper, but the revenues you give us, and you better give us revenues, will be distributed to the left out, the marginalized, the weaker, so they too can participate in the fruits of growth. I mean, that's basically the approach that we all have. And in India, this means, because people have so little at the bottom of the pyramid, that you have to redistribute. I mean, why is it that Mr. Modi's government is boasting about giving, 80 crore, 800 million people free food grains? I mean, that's actually an ambition of failure, that we've not been able to empower them enough that they can afford to buy their own food grains, that you have to give it to them. But it masks a whole lot of other things. Now, the other question is, are there other paths to equity? I've been very well behaved politically in not drawing a parallel between what George said about Mr. Orban and what we could say here about the BJP government in terms of their increasing.
So let's talk about the future. Where can we go?
But I'm just saying, that there is very much a sense that governments in many countries, okay, let me not, but you can certainly name Hungary, Turkey, India, and many more, possibly a more extreme example would be Beijing and Mr. Xi, that they are essentially determining that autonomous institutions, participative institutions, and so on are only okay in as much as they can control them. And that control is more important. But in all fairness, at least to Orban and Modi and Erdogan, they're getting elected despite doing that. The public, in other words, seems to be privileging effectiveness over equity. You're talking about how do we promote equality. The public is turning around and saying what we want is effectiveness from government. So that's the real answer. You need a government that both encourages equality, but is also effective in addressing the core issues of the people and of the economy. And this is something all of us need to learn, whether in government or the opposition in India. When we are in power in a state like Karnataka, we have to be effective in Karnataka. We have to address the problems of the people. And then we can more credibly oppose those policies of the central government that fail to do that. Equally, the central government gets a free pass from the voters for some of their excesses in hollowing out the autonomous institutions and so on, provided they deliver. Provided they deliver the redistributive policies, provided they look after the Aam Aadmi, the common man, all of that stuff. Then people are saying, fine, we'll let you get away with it, so long as you deliver. The moment you stop delivering, we'll vote against you. Now, that's the one check and balance that democracy offers. Now, that doesn't always mean it's enough. There's this, I don't know what you think of it, George, but in Europe there is the Varieties of Democracy Institute in Stockholm. And they issue an annual report. And last year, they downgraded India from a democracy to an electoral autocracy. They're saying, yes, you have free and fair elections. But once you've elected your leaders, they can conduct themselves as autocrats. And that is not democracy. Now, that's not true in Greece yet or in Europe, but it's probably not too far removed from what you're seeing in Hungary or Turkey.
Well, we have our problems in Greece too, so I wouldn't want to make it, even though we are the birthplace of democracy and you are the biggest democracy, so we have this connection. But we are seeing an erosion of democratic norms. We are seeing the concentration of power. And it's not just in people who are in government, but also the whole economic situation where oligarchs basically influence government and are in cahoots with the oligarchs, and this concentration. And when we talk about efficiency, that's what our citizens need. They want efficient governments, but if they only hand it over to governments or to the top people there, after a while, this power can be concentrated and they become less efficient, I believe. Efficient at least, not efficient for citizens, not efficient for the average citizen, because they are then beholden to these other powers. I mean, if you look at in the United States, to become an elected official, you have to have millions and millions of dollars. And you have to go around asking for contributions to be elected. So who can be elected? Either you have to have a lot of money yourself, you have to be well known possibly as maybe a star in Hollywood or something, or you have to ask for money from donors who then you are beholden to. And of course, corruption can be part of this too. So this is one thing I am seeing around the world, unluckily even in my country too. That was one reason why we had the financial crisis. The financial crisis wasn't just because we were overspending. The money we were spending by the previous government I took over from was given to the friends of the government and not spent well. So the people's money was not spent in the public interest. And that is what efficiency should be, a democratic efficiency. One thing I did, which was again inspired by the ancient Greeks, what they did in Athens, when they had some public money being spent, they had to write it on the wall. There was a marble wall, they had plaques, and you could, as a citizen, go and take it to court. So every single resource, every single expenditure was written on the wall. So I said, how do I take that ancient concept and make it a modern concept? I said, well, we have the web. So let us make a law. I made a simple law. No expenditure, whether it's central or local in Greece, is legal unless it is posted on the web. Now, that initially people didn't really understand it. Today, that is where everybody gets their information. And that immediately starts to break the corruption and bring more transparency. It's not enough. But what I'm saying is that we need to understand the problem that our democracies are going through. We are actually seeing the lack of democracies. People say, can democracy work for us? Can it do well? And so on. Actually, I don't think that we are real democracies. If you look at the United States, it's become a plutocracy. And going back to the concept of democracy, when the ancient Greeks coined the term, one of the basic reasons, there are many reasons to have democracy, one is to have non-violent solutions. So we discuss and debate and we vote, that's non-violent, we find compromise. But another one was not to have concentration of power. Democracy was not to have, so when we're seeing so much concentration of power, basically we are seeing the undermining of our democratic institutions and our democratic prospects, which means taking the voice away from you, and you can vote every so many years, but that's about it, and you can tweet or you can do this and that, but that is a false empowerment. That's not a real empowerment.
So, at the end of the day, we all agree that however flawed, democracy is the best of the lot that we have going, and it has its problems, etc. But if we can look at it from today and say, we are also saying citizens, human resource is a really, really big part of that. So for us to have an effective democracy, for us to continue, the thing that amazes me is that no matter what we say, at least in India, the people know what's going on. When they vote, people know what they do. People show up actually to vote. So whatever it is, it's flawed, whatever it is, that's the best system we got going. I would like each of you to talk a little bit about the biggest resource we have, which is the human resource that we have. So for us to have an equitable world, forget democracy, autocracy, whatever it may be, what are some of the things we need to do with our human resource to better educate them, to better have them question things, and especially with this social media, people are blindly following things without questioning anything. So how do we make sure we invest in our human resource? Because I think once that gets better, everything else gets better. So
Right.
what would you like to say about resilience?
Education and skilling are the two obvious answers. I mean, we actually conducted an amazing experiment by granting the vote to a country that was only, in those days, 16% literate. So 84% of the people in this country were illiterate when they got the vote. And there's been no precedent for that anywhere on the planet. Today, obviously, the numbers are different, but we're still not 100% literate.
Yeah.
And nonetheless, people have been able to exercise agency through the vote. Now, I've always argued, and this is not a new argument, I must have first published it 30 years ago, that as our electorate becomes more educated, they will demand more of their politicians, and that we will move away from a politics of identity to a politics of performance. Too much of Indian politics, as you remember, in the 60s, 70s, 80s, even early 90s, or even 90s, became reduced to voting for people of an identity you could relate with. So if you cast your vote, you vote your caste.
Vote your caste, yes.
Or you nowadays increasingly with the BJP, there's a message that is often anchored in a religious community identity. Now, this sort of thing has obviously severe limits, because if you're voting for somebody because you share an identity in common with him or her, you are no longer asking the questions, is she good for me? Is she good in terms of the policies that I believe in? Is she going to do the kinds of things as a lawmaker or as a member of the executive that I want to see happening in my country? And those are the questions an educated voter would be asking themselves. So the short answer is yes, we need to educate people better. The second thing is you need to empower them. Now, how do you empower them? First of all, you empower them by employing them. If they are educated and unemployed, and we have, as you know, the world's largest number of educated unemployed in the world, the highest number of college graduates without jobs in any country in the world is in India. And that's a very worrying thing for me. I want to see people getting the opportunity to contribute productively to society and the economy, on the one hand, by being employed, and on the other hand, to improve their own lives and dream better. And there is nothing more dangerous for a society than legions of unemployed and even worse, unemployable young men. So that's a different footnote. But coming back to this, once people have the skills required to be employed in the world of the 21st century, then only can you meaningfully empower them. And I don't think we fully got there yet. You know, your topic talks about resilience. Now, how do you build resilience in a world where the change is so dizzyingly rapid? I remember reading a report from the Oxford Martin School about 3 years ago that said, at that time, they said 30% of the jobs in the world in 2030 will be jobs that don't exist today. Now, how do you tell a teacher to train a kid for a job that doesn't exist? Their textbooks obviously are completely out of date by the time that job comes along. People are still thinking of the things that are going to be those jobs. Indeed, we know that's true already, because in the 3 years since the Martin School report came out, AI has completely transformed aspects of the job market, right? So what do you do? And the answer to that clearly is, and I say this to teachers all the time when I address audiences of teachers, I say, don't teach the young people what to think, teach them how to think. Ultimately, how to think is what's going to equip them for this uncertain world where they're going to be confronting facts, ideas, information they've never encountered before, certainly not in their classrooms or their textbooks, but which they will have to figure out a way to approach, understand, and overcome. Yeah. And to do that, you need to know how to do that, how to think your way through a problem. So those are the kinds of resilience skills that you need in your human resources. You need people who are empowered, you need people who are able to think independently and where possible out of the box, and you need people who can adapt to change.
Right.
Adaptability is part of the answer for human resources.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a classic problem which is not going to go away of the number of people being thrown out of work in developed economies today who are in their 50s and who say, what do I do now? The answer, the glib answer is retrain. But by that time, you're set in your ways. You probably you don't feel you have the equipment or the inclination to learn something completely new and ways of doing it. and these people essentially join the frustrated unemployed. Now, if that happens to you in your 30s or 40s, maybe you can be retrained. But these are questions that every country has to grapple with. And in our case, just as we leapfrogged into cellular telephones before we had even wired the whole country for landline phones, similarly, we may have to be coping with the problems created by an AI world before we've even employed people in the analog era. And this is the kind of leap we'll have to make. And if our policy makers are not thinking on their feet, we're going to have real problems.
And I think that, yes, policy makers can do something, but if you think of something like an IT revolution that happened in India, it didn't come from policy makers. It came from people doing something different. So I'd love to hear from you about what can we do to change people's thinking, because I think, Shashi, you talk about this a lot also, about the soft skills. We focus on hard skills of learn this formula, etc., but the soft skills of how do you question, how do you learn, how do you communicate, how do you articulate, how do you take your position? These are the things we have to teach our kids, especially in India. We don't teach our kids how to question. We tell them, don't ask any questions, just listen. So what do you think, and talking about both of you, you've had so many avatars in same life. You've been a diplomat and a politician and a popular person and almost film actor, all kinds of stuff. And you, George, you've been a student and politician and so many things. I mean, how do you, maybe that's what we should leave everybody with, how do you reinvent yourself? Because when you came to India, you had no idea how to be a politician talking. I remember talking in Malayalam was like a, big thing. And you, George, after being educated, however of a roaming person, you want to go and lead a country during turbulence. So maybe talk a little bit, both of you, about how do you reinvent yourself? What are your tricks?